The marble floor of the Mensa mansion gleamed like liquid gold under the afternoon sun, each tile reflecting the opulence of a world Mama Amma had only glimpsed from the shadows of servitude. Her calloused hands trembled slightly as she balanced the silver tea tray, her worn shoes whispering against the polished stone, as she made her way through corridors lined with artwork that cost more than she had earned in her entire lifetime. At 53, her back carried the weight of decades spent bent over other people's laundry, other people's children, other people's dreams. The gray in her hair told stories of sleepless nights, of prayers whispered in the dark, of a sacrifice so profound that even she had begun to forget its magnitude. Mrs. Abena Mensah had hired her just 3 days ago, and already the woman's cold eyes and sharp tongue had made it clear that Mama Amma was to remain invisible, a ghost in uniform whose only purpose was to serve without being seen, to exist without leaving a trace. But as she approached the grand parlor, where the family's portraits hung in gilded frames, something made her pause. Her eyes lifted to a photograph she had passed twice before, without truly seeing it. A striking young man, in an impeccable suit, his expression confident and refined, standing beside the late Mr. Kwame Mensah, whose recent death had cast this household into mourning. There was something about the young man's eyes, something that reached across the photograph and gripped her heart with fingers of memory. Her breath caught. No, it couldn't be. The tray wavered in her hands, tea rippling in delicate china cups, but she steadied herself and continued forward, though her pulse now thundered in her ears like distant drums calling her back to a past she had buried beneath years of survival and grief. The house staff had whispered about him all morning. David Mensah, the adopted son, the golden heir who had been studying international business in London and would return today for his father's 1-year memorial service. They spoke of him with a mixture of reverence and curiosity. This young man who had inherited an empire worth billions, who commanded boardrooms across 3 continents, who carried himself with the authority of someone born into power, though everyone knew he had not been. Mama Amma had only half listened to their chatter as she scrubbed floors and folded linens, her mind occupied with a familiar rhythm of labor that had become her meditation, her escape from thoughts that cut too deep when given room to breathe. But now, as she stood in the parlor arranging tea service, while Mrs. Mensah sat rigid in her high-backed chair, speaking on the phone in clipped, business-like tones, Mama Amma found herself glancing repeatedly at the doorway, her heart performing acrobatics she couldn't explain and didn't want to name. When the front doors finally opened and she heard the deep voice greeting the household staff, something ancient and maternal stirred in her chest, a recognition that lived in her bones before it reached her brain. She told herself she was being foolish, that grief and loneliness had made her see ghosts in every young man's face, that the boy she had loved and lost was gone forever, swallowed by Accra's brutal streets 15 years ago, probably dead, or so changed by hardship that even his own shadow wouldn't recognize him. She picked up the teapot with forced steadiness, preparing to pour, when he walked into the room. Time collapsed. The universe held its breath. David Mensah stepped through the doorway in a charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin, his presence filling the space with quiet authority, and Mama Amma's entire body went rigid as stone. The teapot slipped from her fingers. She heard it shatter before she felt her hands were empty, heard Mrs. Mensah's sharp gasp of fury before she saw the tea spreading across that perfect marble like spilled blood, heard her own voice crack like breaking glass as she whispered a name she hadn't spoken aloud in over a decade. Kofi? It wasn't a question. It was a prayer, a sob, a resurrection. The young man froze mid-step, his hand still extended in greeting toward his stepmother, his entire body going taut, as if he'd been struck by lightning. His eyes, those eyes that had haunted her dreams, though older now, though framed by the confidence of a man who had conquered the world, locked onto hers, and in them she saw the flicker of something breaking through, something ancient trying to surface through layers of time and transformation. Mrs. Mensah was on her feet instantly, her voice sharp as a blade. "How dare you, you clumsy, disrespectful woman! You will be dismissed immediately. Guards!" But David raised one hand, and the authority in that simple gesture silenced the room like a judge's gavel. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of mountains shifting. "Wait." He moved toward Mama Amma slowly, as if approaching a mirage that might vanish if he moved too quickly, his eyes scanning her face with an intensity that made her knees weak. She saw his gaze travel from her eyes to her hands, those rough, weathered hands now pressed against her chest, and something in his expression cracked open. "Do you know me?" His voice trembled now, stripped of all its cultivated polish, reduced to something raw and desperate. Did we?" He couldn't finish the sentence, but Mama Amma could, because she had finished it 1,000 times in her prayers. The tears came before she could stop them, carving rivers down her worn cheeks, and she nodded once, then again, her whole body shaking with the force of recognition, of relief, of a grief so old it had become part of her skeleton. "I raised you, Kofi," she whispered, her voice breaking on his name, like a dam finally giving way. "I raised you when the world said you were nobody. I raised you when you were small enough to fit in my arms, when you cried in the night from nightmares, when you learned to write your name with a stick in the dirt because we had no paper. I raised you, my child. I raised you, and then I lost you, and I have mourned you every single day since." The room went deathly silent. Mrs. Mensah stood frozen, her face a mask of horror and fury. The other staff members who had gathered at the commotion pressed themselves against the walls, witnesses to something that felt too sacred, too shattering for ordinary eyes. And David, Kofi, this man who commanded billions, who had shaken hands with presidents, who had built his life on the foundation of reinvention, this man fell to his knees on the tea-stained marble and buried his face in his hands, his shoulders heaving with sobs that came from a place deeper than memory, from a place where love lives even when the mind forgets. The memories came back to him in fragments, like a shattered mirror reassembling itself piece by cutting piece. He remembered now, not everything, not yet, but enough. Enough to recall the small room with the tin roof that sang in the rain, the way water would drip through cracks, and she would place buckets around his sleeping mat, while humming songs in Twi that made him feel safe, even when thunder shook the walls. He remembered her hands, always working, always rough from soap and scrubbing, but gentle when they touched his face, when they braided his hair, when they snuck him extra food from the kitchen, even though she knew she'd be beaten if caught. He remembered the family she worked for, cold people, distant people, who had taken him in as a favor to some forgotten relative and treated him like a burden they endured, rather than a child they cherished. But Mama Amma had cherished him. She had called him her little lion, had told him stories of great warriors and wise kings, had saved half her meager wages to buy him a school uniform, even though the family said education was wasted on orphans. He remembered being 10 years old when everything collapsed. The family lost their money, their home, their patience. He remembered being told to pack his few belongings, remembered Mama Amma pleading with them, offering to take him, to care for him. But she had no home of her own, No family to turn to, no way to feed herself, let alone a growing boy. He remembered her face the last time he saw her, streaked with tears, twisted with helplessness, as they pushed him out into the street, with nothing but the clothes on his back, and told him to find his own way. He remembered looking back as he walked away, seeing her collapse against the wall, her wails following him down the road, until distance swallowed them. And then he remembered forgetting, deliberately, necessarily, burying those memories so deep that survival became possible, so deep that he could become someone new, someone without that pain. Mrs. Mensah's voice cut through the moment like a knife through silk. "This is ridiculous, David. She's obviously lying, trying to manipulate you for money. Look at her. She's a housemaid, a nobody. She probably heard about your past and concocted this story. I will not have this woman disrupting this household with her schemes." But David rose to his feet with a grace that belied the storm raging inside him, and when he turned to face his stepmother, his expression held a steel she had never seen before, a quiet fury that made her step backward despite herself. Scheming, his voice was soft, dangerous. "This woman couldn't scheme if her life depended on it. I know, because she spent years sacrificing everything she had for a child who wasn't even hers. She has no idea that I've been searching for her for the last 5 years, that I've had investigators combing through records and orphanages and villages trying to find the woman from my childhood, whose face I could barely remember, but whose love I never forgot." He turned back to Mama Amma, who stood trembling, unable to comprehend what she was hearing. "After you lost me," he said gently, "I wandered. For 2 years, I lived in the streets of Accra, slept in gutters, ate from garbage, ran from police and predators, and people who saw street children as disposable. I stole to eat. I fought to survive. I forgot what it meant to be human." His voice caught, and he had to pause, breathing deeply before continuing. "One night, during a rainstorm, I collapsed outside a luxury car dealership. I was 12 years old, and I weighed less than a bag of rice. I expected to die there on that pavement, and honestly, I had made my peace with it. But a man found me, Mr. Kwame Mensah, my father. He could have stepped over me like everyone else did. But he stopped. He knelt in the rain beside a filthy street child, and he said, 'Young man, what is your name?' I told him I didn't remember, and he said, 'Then we'll give you a new one, and a new life to go with it.'" Mama Amma's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob that wanted to become a scream, a laugh, a prayer of thanksgiving. David continued, his words flowing now like a river that had found its course after years of being dammed. "My father, and he was my father in every way that mattered, took me home that night. His wife, his biological son, they had all died in a car accident just months before. He was drowning in grief, searching for purpose, and somehow God or fate or destiny put me in his path. He adopted me legally, gave me his name, put me in the best schools. But more than that, he gave me something I had forgotten existed: dignity. He never let me forget where I came from. He would say, 'David, your past is not your shame. It's your foundation. Build something on it that honors everyone who loved you before I found you.'" He looked at Mama Amma with eyes that shimmered with unshed tears. "For 5 years, since I turned 23 and took control of my own resources, I've been trying to find you. I hired investigators. I funded programs for street children, hoping you might work at one, that someone might recognize your description. I had fragments, a song you used to sing, the way you smelled like coconut oil and cassava flour. The sound of your voice calling me little lion. But I had no name, no village, nothing concrete. I searched through every database of domestic workers in Ghana. I even built an entire orphan foundation, hoping that somehow, some way, our paths would cross again. His voice broke completely now. I never imagined you would walk back into my life, carrying a tea tray in my own home. That destiny would be this precise, this merciful. The weight of those words settled over Mama Amma like a blanket, warm and suffocating all at once. Her legs finally gave way, and she sank into the nearest chair, her body shaking with the force of emotions too large to contain. Joy and grief and relief and regret, all tangled together in a knot she couldn't begin to unravel. I searched for you too, she whispered, her voice raw. For months after they threw you out, I went to every street corner, every market, every shelter. I asked everyone I saw if they had seen a small boy with bright eyes and a birthmark on his left shoulder. But Accra swallows children like the ocean swallows rain, completely without trace. I thought. She couldn't finish, but she didn't need to. The thought that had haunted her for 15 years hung between them, unspoken but understood. She had thought he was dead, that her failure to save him had condemned him to a death in the gutters, anonymous and unmourned. I blamed myself every day, she continued, tears flowing freely now, unchecked and unashamed. I told myself that if I had been braver, smarter, richer, if I had sacrificed more, worked harder, begged louder, I could have saved you. I carried that guilt like a stone in my chest, crushing me slowly, making every breath a reminder of my failure. David crossed the space between them in 2 strides and knelt before her again, taking her worn hands in his smooth, manicured ones. The contrast between them stark as night and day, poverty and wealth, then and now. You didn't fail me, he said fiercely, his grip tightening, as if he could transfer his certainty into her bones through touch alone. You saved me. Everything I am, everything I've become, everything good in me. It all started with you. You taught me what love looks like when you fed me from your own plate, even when you were hungry. You taught me dignity when you insisted I go to school clean, even if it meant you washed my one uniform by hand every night. You taught me hope when you sang to me in the dark and told me I was destined for greatness, even when the world treated me like trash. Mrs. Mensah made one final attempt to regain control of the situation, her voice shrill with desperation and barely concealed panic. David, think about what you're doing. This woman is a servant. You're about to make a fool of yourself and this family over some sentimental childhood memory that probably isn't even accurate. Your father left you an empire. Are you really going to jeopardize everything over a housemaid? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as David slowly rose to his feet and turned to face the woman who had never shown him genuine warmth, who had tolerated his presence in her home only because her husband's will had made it financially necessary. My father, he said, with a quiet intensity that made even the guards by the door stand straighter, left me more than an empire. He left me a mission. He used to say that wealth without compassion is just hoarding, that power without purpose is just tyranny. He taught me that every person, every single person, regardless of where they sleep or what they wear or how much money sits in their bank account, carries infinite worth. He gestured toward Mama Amma, who sat watching this exchange with wide eyes, still unable to fully process that this commanding man in the expensive suit was her Kofi, her little lion, alive and thriving beyond her wildest imaginings. This woman loved me when loving me cost her everything and gave her nothing. She poured her life into mine when I had no value to anyone, when I was just another orphan, another statistic, another mouth to feed. And now you stand here and call her just a servant, as if her humanity is defined by her job title." He shook his head slowly. "No, I won't tolerate that. Not in this house. Not anywhere I have influence." The memorial service for Mr. Kwame Mensah was held 3 days later in the grand ballroom of the Mensah Foundation headquarters, and every important person in Accra society was there. Politicians and business moguls, celebrities and philanthropists, all dressed in their finest black and gold, all ready to pay respects to a man whose generosity had touched thousands of lives. Mrs. Mensah had planned every detail to perfection, expecting a dignified, predictable ceremony that would reinforce the family's status and transition David smoothly into his role as the new patriarch of the Mensah Empire. What she didn't expect was for David to request that Mama Amma be present, and not as part of the serving staff, but as an honored guest seated in the front row. The murmurs started the moment Mama Amma entered the ballroom in a simple but elegant dress that David had purchased for her gray hair styled with care, her weathered face clean of makeup, but radiant with a dignity that no cosmetic could manufacture. People whispered behind their programs, "Who is she? Why is she seated with the family? Is she a long-lost relative?" Mrs. Mensah's jaw was clenched so tight it could have cracked diamonds, but she said nothing, trapped by the knowledge that David now controlled not just his inheritance, but the foundation's board, the family businesses, everything her late husband had built. When David took the podium to deliver his eulogy, the room fell silent, expecting the usual platitudes about legacy and loss. Instead, he began by saying something that made the entire assembly lean forward. "My father saved my life, but he was not the first person to do so. Before there was Mr. Kwame Mensah, before there was wealth and education and opportunity, there was love. And today I want to honor the woman who gave me that first, most crucial gift." He gestured to Mama Amma, and every head in the ballroom turned to look at this woman who had been invisible to most of them just moments before. "Mama Amma," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "Please join me." She hesitated, terrified of all those eyes, all those expensive clothes, all that judgment. But David's hand was extended, and in his eyes she saw her little lion, the boy who had trusted her completely, who had believed her when she told him he was special. She rose on shaking legs and walked to the podium, where David removed his suit jacket, a jacket that probably cost more than she had earned in 5 years, and draped it around her shoulders like a royal robe. Then, in front of 300 of Accra's most powerful people, this billionaire, this captain of industry, this man who commanded respect, from boardrooms to parliament halls, knelt before a housemaid. The gasps rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. "This woman," David said, his voice ringing clear through the microphone, "raised me when I was an orphan with nothing. She fed me when she herself was hungry. She protected me when I was vulnerable. She loved me when I was unlovable. She poured her life into mine, expecting nothing in return, receiving nothing in return, except the satisfaction of knowing she had kept one small child alive in a world that would have gladly let him die. She taught me what it means to be human before my father taught me how to be successful. And I want everyone here to understand something crucial. I am only standing at this podium, only carrying on my father's legacy, only alive at all, because this woman decided that my life mattered." Tears streamed down Mama Amma's face as David continued, his words a waterfall of recognition, of validation, of love given voice after years of silence. Today, I announce the establishment of the Mama Ama Foundation for orphaned children, funded with 50 million CDIs to start, dedicated to finding, protecting, and educating street children across Ghana. Every child we save will know her name. Every child we feed will be fed in her honor. The crowd erupted in applause, but David raised his hand for silence. He wasn't finished. I also announced that Mama Ama will serve as the director of this foundation, not as a symbolic figurehead, but as a working leader. She knows what these children need because she gave everything she had to one of them. And finally, his voice cracked here, the CEO's Polish giving way entirely to the orphan's gratitude. I want to say publicly what I should have been able to say 15 years ago, but couldn't. Mama, thank you. Thank you for not walking past me when everyone else did. Thank you for seeing value in a child the world had labeled worthless. Thank you for being the first person to teach me that love is not something you earn. It's something you receive from people brave enough to give it without guarantee of return. He took her weathered hands in his and kissed them gently, reverently, as if they were holy relics. You saved my life long before my father found me. You planted seeds in soil everyone else said was barren. And now look at what grew from your sacrifice. This isn't my success, it's yours. It's the harvest of everything you sowed in me when I was too small to understand, too broken to hope, too lost to dream. Mrs. Mensah sat frozen in her seat, her face a mask of shock and humiliation, watching her carefully constructed social order collapse around her. But Mama Ama barely noticed her, barely noticed the crowd, barely noticed anything except the man, her boy, her Kofi, who had somehow found his way back to her across an impossible distance, through an impossible journey, defying every odd that should have kept them separated forever. 6 months later, the children's village was complete. A sprawling complex built in Mama Ama's home region, with dormitories and classrooms, medical facilities and playgrounds, gardens where children could grow food and dignity in equal measure. Mama Ama walked through it every morning, still unable to believe this was real, that she, a woman who had spent her life scrubbing other people's floors, now oversaw an institution that would save thousands of lives. David visited every weekend, sometimes arriving in his helicopter, sometimes driving himself in a modest car, always bringing his briefcase so they could work together on expansion plans, funding strategies, partnership proposals. But their best moments were the quiet ones, sitting under the ancient baobab tree in the courtyard, while children played around them, their laughter like bells, ringing hope into the air. Sometimes they talked about the past, filling in the gaps, healing old wounds with the salve of shared memory. Sometimes they talked about the future, dreaming bigger than either had once dared. And sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, two souls who had found each other again, against impossible odds, who had proved that love planted in poverty can bloom into forests of blessing. The village elders called it a miracle. The newspapers called it philanthropy. But David and Mama Ama knew it was something simpler and more profound. It was the natural result of seeds sown long ago in faith, watered with tears, harvested in joy. As the sun set one evening, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber, Mama Ama rested her head on David's shoulder, no longer afraid to claim him as her son, no longer doubting that she had earned the right to love him. And David wrapped his arm around her shoulders, this woman whose rough hands had smoothed his path to greatness, whose sacrifice had purchased his future, whose love had never asked for anything except the chance to give. The world measures worth in titles and bank accounts, in square footage and stock portfolios, in followers and fame. But in that moment, under that tree, surrounded by children who would grow up knowing they mattered, because Mama Ama had once decided that one small orphan boy mattered. The only measure that existed was love. And by that measure, they were both billionaires, both royalty, both living proof that the universe keeps perfect accounts, that every act of kindness returns multiplied, that no sacrifice made in love is ever truly lost. The proverb proved true once more, as it always does, for those patient enough to see its fullness. The seeds of love planted in poverty will bloom into forests of blessing, and kindness never forgets its keeper. Sometimes the children we raise in shadows grow up to become the light,